Hello and welcome to the Admech series, the series where we go from your first purchase to your first 2,000 point army list and everything in between for the forces of the Adeptus Mechanicus, also known as the Admech. In this video we'll be taking a look at the different flyer and transport options within the primary codex of the Adeptus Mechanicus. And with that being said, let's begin by taking a look at our first option, which is the most popular one, being the Archaeopter Fusilave. And the Fusilave comes in at 150 points for a single model after the latest points increase, and now each army is limited to the number of aircraft it can take to a maximum of 2 within a 2,000 point game, and they're limited to 1 within games below that points level. And for that point cost, you get an incredibly mobile profile considering this is an aircraft, and even for aircraft standards, this one is incredibly versatile in its mobility as it has a 20 to 50 inch movement speed that it can choose to reduce using its hover aircraft ability, which allows it to stand in position or move up to 20 inches. However, it does lose some of its special abilities, such as hard to hit, airborne, and maneuverable when using this aspect of its mobility. In addition to that, what really makes the Archaeopters stand out in comparison to many other aircraft is their maneuverable aircraft ability, which lets them pivot at the beginning of their movement and once again during any point of their movement. And those 90-degree pivots really allow this aircraft to position very successfully in comparison to a lot of other choices that enemies might have in their air force. And as such, this really does increase the value of the Archaeopters. In addition to that, because the Archaeopter is an aircraft, it does have the airborne keyword, which gives it the fly keyword, meaning it just flies over terrain. And in addition to that flying keyword, it cannot be engaged within close combat by non-flying units, which means it's incredibly hard to lock down an Archaeopter within melee combat, and in most cases, your opponents won't be able to. And not only is it hard to lock down in melee, but it has an incredibly powerful durability profile with a toughness of 7, 10 wounds, and a 3+ normal save. It also has access to a 4+ feel no pain save against mortal wounds using the stratagem known as Benevolence of the Omnicile, which will cost you 1 command point to use. Though with that being said, it does lack an invulnerable save, which can be a little awkward against certain weapons profiles. However, it does have the hard to hit ability, which gives enemy range attacks -1 to hit when attacking the Archaeopter. And if you're still not satisfied by the durability of this unit, you can opt to take a chaff launcher in place of the standard command uplink, bringing up the points total of the Fusilave to 170 points, but this does give the Fusilave a damage reduction of 1 to a minimum of 1 damage, making it very difficult to take down when you consider its high toughness and the fact that it has 10 wounds, in addition to negative hit modifiers and being unable to be locked down in combat in most cases. Not only that, but the chaff launcher also gives the Archaeopter the smokescreen ability, which gives it access to yet another durability stratagem, being the incense exhaust stratagem, which allows it to spend 1 command point to give enemies a further -1 to hit when making attacks. Do note that this no longer stacks in the same way it would have stacked in the 8th edition rules, but there are going to be plenty of situations where giving multiple negative hit modifiers does balance out to their positive hit modifiers and does help your durability. However, this is a little bit of an expensive stratagem considering the natural durability of the Fusilave as it is. Now let's say you chose to not go with the chaff launcher, you would have kept your command uplink, and the command uplink simply gives the Fusilave the data tether ability, which also allows it to give a friendly Forge World Skitarii core unit within 3 inches the data tether ability for 1 turn when it utilizes this ability. In addition to that, it does give it access to yet another special stratagem known as Electrofilament Countermeasures, which allows it to spend 2 command points to choose a target enemy unit within 6 inches, and that enemy unit is not affected by different aura abilities of other enemy units until your next movement phase. As such, this can be a good way of shutting down different buffs that an enemy unit gets. However, it is a little bit difficult to use at times, as it has a rather short range and a rather high command point cost. That being said though, this is a lasting effect that continues on until your next movement phase, meaning that opponents can no longer move out of it as they could have within 8th edition. However, it only targets 1 enemy unit now and allows for your different auras to affect them, as it only prohibits enemy auras. So there are a few different ways of playing this. However, I do think the chaff launcher has gained a lot of popularity, and I do think the chaff launcher is a really good choice when you have the points to spend on it, considering it significantly boosts the durability of the Archaeopter and the command uplink has lost a little bit of power. However, the general increase in points of the data tether on your standard units does make the command uplink a little more appealing. Now let's take a look at the different weapon systems that the Fusilave has. To begin with, the Fusilave has a 3+ ballistic skill that degrades to a 5+ ballistic skill as it gets bracketed through its profile. And for the ballistic skill, the Fusilave comes with 4 Cognus Heavy Stubbers having a 36-inch range and 4 assault shots per Cognus Heavy Stubber at a strength of 4 and 1 damage per shot with no armor penetration. This means that the Fusilave has a total of 16 light shots that are similar to a bolter at a much longer range. This isn't particularly impressive, but this is just a throw-in to give it a little bit of firepower to go along with its special weapon system. The special weapon system of the Fusilave is known as the Bomb Rack, and what the Bomb Rack does is that it allows you to select an enemy unit that this model moved over in your movement phase. Then you roll a d6 for each model in that enemy unit, unless the unit consists of vehicles or monstrous creatures, in which case you roll 6d6 for each vehicle and or monster within that unit. Then for each roll of 4+, that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. However, do keep in mind you are restricted to a maximum of 10d6 dice for this ability, so it does have a limitation in terms of how many mortal wounds it can put out, and considering that it happens on a 4+, on average, if you're hitting a unit of 10 models, you will be putting out on average about 5 mortal wounds. And that's a rather amazing amount of mortal wounds considering this is only 150 points, even after the points increase that we saw within the latest points update. And this is why this unit has been so very popular. And in addition to all of that, I should mention that this weapon is actually an ability that inflicts its damage within the movement phase, meaning that it has some extra utility against abilities that care about damage in certain phases, such as the Catan Necrodermis ability, which only allows a maximum of 3 damage per phase, meaning you can sneak in 3 extra damage with mortal wounds using this ability and then inflict another 3 damage within the shooting phase, which allows you to take out units such as the Catan incredibly efficiently. And more interestingly, the Fusilave has one other special stratagem that plays into the whole bombing theme of this unit. That stratagem being the Seismic Bomb stratagem, which will cost you 1 command point. And the stratagem says you select an enemy you moved over in your movement phase outside of a Titanic or flying unit, and that selected unit is considered to be shaken, meaning that models within that unit move at half speed, and the rolls for advancing and charging are also halved, which can be really potent against armies that require a lot of mobility, or even melee armies that wish to engage your units as all of a sudden they're moving at a very slow pace, and you can take advantage of them considering Admech can be a very shooty army, which does give you even more utility. And do keep in mind, this stratagem is not linked to your Bomb Rack ability usage, so you can target 2 different units with the Bomb Rack and the Seismic Bomb, giving you even more utility out of this unit in the long run. And finally, like all vehicles, the Fusilave does explode, and because it is a Skitarii unit, it does benefit from the Doctrina abilities, which are probably even more beneficial to it in many cases, considering it generally doesn't care about some of the negative modifiers that might affect it, as its abilities are rather static, despite the negative modifiers that it may experience. And as such, it's rather clear why the Fusilave was so popular and will still continue being popular going into the future, as it's still a reasonably low-cost model that inflicts a ton of mortal wounds against all kinds of targets and has quite a lot of utility, as well as a little bit of extra light firepower thanks to its Cognis Heavy Stubbers, which is never a bad throwing to have. Not only that, but it's also quite a beautiful model, and I'm sure it'll continue seeing play even with the points increase and the restriction onto aircraft. After the Fusilave, the second most popular flyer option for the Admech forces is the Stratoraptor, and the Stratoraptor has also seen a points increase, going up to a total points cost of 180 points, which can be a rather expensive points cost, though it does have the same nice stat line as the Fusilave does, with a 20 to 50 inch movement, a 3+ ballistic skill that does degrade to a 5+ ballistic skill, 7 toughness, 10 wounds, and a 3+ normal save, as well as access to that 4+ feel no pain save. It also has all of the generic special abilities that the Fusilave has, such as airborne, pivoting during movement, and being hard to hit, as well as having access to the command uplink as part of its baseline profile, and the ability to upgrade to the chaff launcher, which will increase the points total of the Stratoraptor to 200 points. It also has all of the same stratagems related to any of those parts of its kit, so it does have access to the electrofilament countermeasures as well as the smokescreen ability, so that's something to keep in mind when outfitting your Stratoraptors. Though what sets the Stratoraptor apart from the Fusilave is that the Stratoraptor comes equipped with a lot more shooting weapon systems than the Fusilave, making it a lot more of a gunship as opposed to a bomber like the Fusilave. Now let's take a look at those different weapon systems. To begin with, it comes with 2 Cognis Heavy Stubbers, giving it a total of 18 assault shots with that bolter profile at a 36-inch range. Now where it starts to actually get some interesting weapons is that it comes equipped with 2 heavy phosphor blasters, each of those also having a 36-inch range, and combined they give you 6 heavy shots total with a strength of 6, 2 armor penetration, and 1 damage, while also ignoring the dense cover benefits your enemies might have. And that's not exactly bad, but it's not something you would go out of your way to get within the Admech forces, as there are a lot of similar weapons that you can find on other units, especially in the heavy support options. And the third weapon being a single twin Cognis las cannon. The twin Cognis las cannon having a 48-inch range with 2 assault shots at a strength 9, 3 armor penetration, and D3 plus 3 damage. All in all, none of these weapon systems stand out as something amazing in their own right, though when you consider the points cost and the recent increase on Iron Striders within the Admech forces, they do add up to give you just enough benefit. And don't forget, whereas the Iron Striders are on the ground and have limitations in their targeting, the incredible mobility and the height at which the Stratoraptor flies does give you a lot more targeting ability, so it does give you some benefits in that regard. Though with all that being said, I do think the Stratoraptor is still going to be viable going into the future, even at the new points cost and the limitations of the different aircraft. However, I think the Fusilave is definitely going to start to overtake it, as the Fusilave gives you something a little more unique with the ability to put out so many mortal wounds, whereas the different weapon systems on the Stratoraptor can be found on Iron Striders and Dune Crawlers, so it's not something spectacularly different that you'll go out of your way to pay so many points and to take up one of those precious aircraft slots that your army now has such a limited amount of. As such, I think the Stratoraptor is going to be a bit more of a fringe choice, though I think we'll still see it pop up from time to time. And for the most part, we're going to be seeing those Fusilaves, which are now still inexpensive enough to be very appealing and still bring something unique to the table, sort of like we see with the Skorpius Dunerider, which has alternate weapon systems, but generally one of those weapon systems gives something so unique that it's very hard to compete with. There is one more style of Archaeopter, being the Archaeopter Transvector, which will cost you a total of 110 points, and is considered an aircraft and not a transport, which does limit it a bit considering that its main function is that of a transport, but it does take up those aircraft slots. And as the Transvector is an Archaeopter, it does have the same profile as well as access to the command uplink and chaff launcher of the Stratoraptor or Fusilave. But at the same time, the Archaeopter Transvector does not have any of the awesome weapon systems, such as the bomb rack or the different heavy weapons that either of its other counterparts include. Instead, the Transvector comes with a similar weapons loadout as the Dunerider, carrying 2 Cognis Heavy Stubbers and 1 Twin Cognis Heavy Stubber, meaning that it has a total of 16 shots with those Cognis Heavy Stubber profiles, which is definitely nothing impressive and is considered more of a throw-in as we saw on the Fusilave. So what does the Transvector have that sets it apart from the other two? Well, as I mentioned, it is a transport unit, and it has a transport capacity of 6 for friendly Forge World infantry models. And that transport capacity, in my opinion, is really not enough to be that interesting in itself. However, I understand with the amount of mobility that the Transvector has, it is hard to make it have any larger of a transport capacity, considering that it's not that expensive in points still, and it would compete too much with the Dunerider. And due to the complexity of solving the problem that the Transvector has, I do wish they did something like allowing it to transport Cataphrons or Castellan robots in a much more limited capacity, because that would not only be a solution to the Transvector's problems, but I think it would also increase the viability of some of those other units, thus solving 2 different issues with one specific rules change, though unfortunately they didn't go with that route. Instead, they went with a little bit of a different route, giving it a new special ability that is called Combined Landing, and what this ability does is that you can take 2 Transvectors and neither of them start on the field. Do keep in mind that the Transvector is an aircraft, so if you do take 2 of them, you've eaten up your entire limitation of aircraft models within an army if it's a 2,000 point game, and if it's a game with a smaller size than that, you can't even utilize this ability because you're restricted to the number of aircraft models you can have within an army. Rather unfortunate and rather awkward considering this model was already not really seeing any play in comparison to its 2 counterparts. So now that we know you have to take 2 Transvectors in combination to use this ability, what does this ability actually do? Well, it increases the transport capacity to a total of 12 for those 2 Archaeopters combined, and they function as one unit for the purposes of utilizing this ability. And as such, you can take a unit of 7 to 12 models as opposed to 2 units of 6 or 2 units of a minimum squad size in order to allow them to be transported, which means in a sense you can increase their transport capacity to a total of 12 by paying a total of 220 points and taking 2 Transvectors within your army. Once again, not that exciting, but it does allow you to deploy this unit as a single unit within your reinforcement step, within your 1st, 2nd, or 3rd movement phase, regardless of mission rules. And if you do set them up this way, the units embarked must disembark immediately, and if they're set up this way, all units have to be within 9 inches of coherency within one another. This rule is a bit awkward, and I do think the new aircraft rules definitely make it a lot more awkward than it needs to be, as it's already quite a lot of text to explain what it even does and how it functions, as you have quite a lot of restrictions and it ends up eating up a ton of your points when it is utilized. I do think that the Transvector might be somewhat viable in the situation that you simply want a flyer unit and you want to be able to quickly transport a unit of 5 to 6 Skitarii, though at the end of the day, I don't think you're going to encounter that in a lot of situations. However, maybe there's some niche scenarios where you do end up using it. The nice thing is that it's really easy to magnetize the Archaeopter flyer, so you can swap between the 3 different modes, such as the Fusilave, Stratoraptor, and Transvector, giving you a little bit of ability to play around with the different builds without having to invest in brand new models. And especially now considering the different restrictions on aircraft, it might be a good time to try out different builds and see what you can get away with. However, at the end of the day, I think because of those restrictions, you're generally just going to start seeing the Fusilave because of how much power it brings to the table in comparison to the other options that you can find within the forces of the Adeptus Mechanicus, as there are different transport options you can take, and there are different heavy weapons platforms, but none of which generate quite as many mortal wounds as that Fusilave can. And finally, we come to the last unit within this video, which is actually a dedicated transport unit, unlike the Transvector, which is a flyer unit despite having the functionality of being a transport. This unit being the Skorpius Dunerider, which will cost you 95 points baseline, and is a rather good transport model despite seeing a little less play in the 9th edition forces due to how much natural mobility some of the Admech units have, as well as the larger squad sizes, which does make the Dunerider a little harder to utilize. However, even with that being said, it does still see a decent amount of play, and with the different points changes as well as rules changes, it might see a bit of a comeback, as it's a good way of transporting different squads across the table. So what do you get for those 95 points? Well, you have a 12-inch mobility on a toughness 6 body with 12 wounds and a 3+ normal save, as well as access to that 4+ feel no pain save against mortal wounds in the form of the stratagem known as Benevolence of the Omnissiah. In addition to that, you get the same weapons loadout as the Transvector on a ballistic skill of 3+, which gives you 2 Cognis Heavy Stubbers and a twin Cognis Heavy Stubber. This is essentially the same as having 4 Cognis Heavy Stubbers, which means you have a total of 16 shots at a 36-inch range with a strength of 4 and 1 damage per shot with no armor penetration. Not the worst profile in the world, but nothing impressive either, just a little bit of a throw-in to give you a little bit of firepower against swarm-style units. And considering the Admech has quite a lot of heavy firepower, it's not the worst thing to have a little more light firepower to help you out with the quantity of shots as opposed to the quality of shots in situations like this. The Skorpius is also a Skitarii unit, like all of the different flyers, meaning that it has access to the Doctrinas. In addition to that, it does have the broad spectrum data tether ability, which simply means that it has the data tether ability in itself and can give the data tether ability to one friendly Forge World Skitarii core unit within 6 inches. And once again, I should mention that the data tethers within normal squads has gone up in price, so having the ability to grant that ability to a unit is much more beneficial than it once was in the past, and considering this is a transport that will oftentimes be transporting different Skitarii units, it's definitely a nice ability to have, as you can drop off that unit, camp an objective, and still give it the data tether ability so that it can utilize that, while the Skorpius Dunerider protects it from one side by screening against different melee threats. One other thing I should really mention is that the Dunerider transport capacity has gone up to 12 models within the 9th edition rules, whereas before it was capped at a total of 10 models. And this means that all of a sudden you can take a unit of 10 Skitarii models with some different characters within your forces, or you can split up that unit to 2 5-man Skitarii units and still fit in those special characters. Additionally, you can even do some tricks like taking a unit of 7 Fulgurite Electropriests alongside a 5 Skitarii Vanguard, so that if they get into combat, the Skitarii Vanguard can debuff the enemy unit so that your Fulgurite Electropriests have an easier time of destroying them with their Electrostaves or other combinations such as this. It's actually a really nice change, as all of a sudden it gives you a little more versatility and ability to transport different units without having to be restricted to awkward numbers of times. This does make something like the Taraxi Drill a little less of an exciting option now, as all of a sudden the Dunerider can do a lot of similar things to the Taraxi Assault Drill. However, the drill still has some of its own special abilities, but we'll cover that in a different video when we go over the different Forge World options that the Admech have available to him through that line of models, and this video is just focusing on what's in the main codex in itself. As I also mentioned earlier, the nice thing about the Dunerider is that it's a rather large model, so it does make for a good blocking and screening option, as you can position it within different gaps of terrain and force things like the enemy melee units to charge into it before they can reach an objective, meaning that they'll be stuck in combat with it until they destroy it and then can advance upon your normal units. Don't forget also that the Skorpius Dunerider is a vehicle, so it does explode when it is destroyed, and it can be forced to explode like any other vehicle, utilizing a stratagem when it is destroyed. And this means that not only is your opponent going to have to deal with the screening capabilities, but they're also going to be taking some mortal wounds when they do happen to destroy this vehicle, thus giving you a further edge and making it easier to destroy that enemy unit. Especially if you're running multiple Duneriders, it becomes easier and easier to create a blockade that your enemy will not get through with their melee units, thus making it rather annoying for them and giving you a really big edge against certain armies, while your Skitarii forces hold your different objectives. And as such, with the different points increases on some of the heavy weapons platforms, as well as the changes to the aircraft, I do think we're going to see a little bit more Duneriders on the tabletop, as they do have a decent amount of utility, at a reasonable enough points cost, making them a decent overall option for any army that's taking small to medium size Skitarii units. And as always, if you've enjoyed the content, like and subscribe, as it really does help the channel out. And if you get the opportunity, please do share the channel, as that not only massively helps the channel, but also helps the people who may discover it and benefit from the content. I would also like to give a quick shout out to my patrons. You guys are awesome people. Thank you very much for supporting the channel. And regardless if you're a patron or not, thank you for watching and have a great day.